As the battalion of British grenadiers assaulting the redoubt anchoring the left of the American position at Breed's Hill advanced, one of the defenders, a 28-year-old novice soldier, leveled his musket. Breathing heavily, he remembered the words of his commander, General Israel Putnam, to aim at the handsome coats, pick off the commanders. Remembering old Put's advice, Salem Poor aimed at who he believed was an officer, and he pulled the trigger. His aim was true, and the round struck the right leg of his target. His victim, Lieutenant Colonel James Abercrombie, the battalion commander, crumpled to the ground. The Battle of Bunker Hill was Poor's first taste of combat. Perhaps Abercrombie was the first man he had ever killed. As his heart pounded out of his chest and he struggled to reload his weapon as return fire whizzed overhead, perhaps he heard the sweet sound of a fife echoing across the battlements. Over the roar of the guns and the screams of the dead and dying, the familiar tune helped him calm his nerves. After a deep breath, Poor reloaded, leveled his weapon again, and fired into the advancing mass of British soldiers. But up to this point in our story, we have failed to mention something very important. Both Rifleman Salem Poor and Fifer Barzillai Lew were African American, two brave men whose contributions to the American Revolution have gone underappreciated in the annals of American history. Welcome to America's Forgotten Founders, where we will look at people whose contributions to the American Revolution, whether on the battlefield, in the halls of power, or on the home front, have been all but forgotten by the annals of history. Today, we've got a different kind of video for you. At the Battle of Bunker Hill, an estimated 36 African Americans served alongside the colonial forces. Around 4% of all soldiers, some 5,000 men who served in the Continental Army, were African American. Unfortunately, our knowledge about these men's achievements and service history, as well as details about their lives, both before and after the war, is relatively limited. That's why today's video is going to be a 2-in-1. And as we tell our tale, we want you to remember the countless men, free and enslaved, white and black, whose stories, sacrifices, and lives have been lost to history. That said, let's begin with the life of Barzillai Lew. Barzillai Lew was the eldest son of free African Americans Primus Lew and Margaret Lew from Groton, Massachusetts. The man who would go on to be called Zeal for his military service was born on November 5th, 1743. We know little about Barzillai's early years. When he was 17, though, he followed in his father's footsteps and enlisted as a fifer in Captain Thomas Farrington's company during the French and Indian War. Before we continue, here is a quick aside about musicians in military history. Musicians have played an essential role in military operations since ancient times. From fifers and trumpeters to drummers and bagpipers, they have provided the beat that helps soldiers march in unison. For millennia, trumpeters and drummers helped commanders issue orders even over the deafening roar of battle. Musicians also helped keep morale up, both in and out of combat. For example, during the First World War, Canadian bagpiper James Cleland Richardson was awarded the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for gallantry, for striding up and down outside the wire, playing his pipes with the greatest coolness. His actions inspired the company to rush the wire with such fury and determination that the obstacle was overcome and the position captured. Musicians, though they may have been unarmed, were in as much danger, if not more so, than the soldier wielding a musket by their side, and their contribution to victory would be just as great, if not greater. So, returning to Barzillai Lew, it's believed he was present when Montreal fell to a combined British Native American force in the fall of 1760. Though he served for under a year, Lew earned his men's and commanders' respect as both a soldier and a musician. He left the service with a reputation as a big and strong man with an extraordinary talent as a musician. After returning from his brief service, Zeal inherited the family farm when his father and stepmother passed away. By the mid-1760s, he sold the family farm and moved to Chelmsford, Massachusetts. He found work as a barrel maker. The hard-working Zeal was evidently successful because, in 1766, he was able to buy the freedom of his soon-to-be wife, Dinah Bauman, for £400 from Major Abraham Blood. We don't know what Lew did from the time he married Dinah and the outbreak of the Revolution. He and Dinah most likely had a quiet life as they began starting a family. We don't know what compelled Barzillai Lew to take up arms alongside his fellow colonists. He, like many, was likely upset about British taxation and the British occupation of Boston. He, like his fellow freemen, wanted to protect his rights. Whatever his motivations, Zeal enlisted for 8 months in John Ford's company in the 27th Massachusetts Regiment on May 6, 1775. The regiment joined the American troops congregating around Boston. On the night of June 16th, the 27th marched to Breed's Hill and began taking up position on the far left of the American position. During the bloodiest battle of the American Revolution, Zeal would help keep the men in good spirits by playing his version of "There's Nothing Makes the British Run Like Yankee Doodle Dandy." Despite his term of service ending on April 1st, 1776, he would quickly re-enlist as the situation in the Northern Department became critical. By August 1776, records placed the fifer at Fort Ticonderoga. During his time at the fort, when General John Burgoyne's surrendered army arrived as prisoners, Zeal, the best musician in the garrison, was allowed to play his fife as the defeated British army marched past. Unfortunately, that's all we know about Barzillai's time in the Continental Army. Most sources agree he was discharged by 1780. Being paid well for his service, the Lew family purchased a large farm along the Merrimack River near Draycote, Massachusetts. On Zeal Road, Barzillai and Dinah would raise their 13 children on a respectable estate. Despite running a profitable farm, Zeal continued working also as a barrel maker to make extra money. While we don't know what type of education the Lew children received, we know one thing: they were all talented musicians. The family would eventually form a band. Of their skill, it was said that no family in Middlesex County, from Lowell to Cambridge, could produce so much good music. The family performed at all manner of events, from college commencements in Boston to family gatherings in Portland, Maine. By the time of his death at the age of 78 in 1822, the Lew family was one of the wealthiest families in Draycote. The Lew family, fervent abolitionists, would later run an underground railroad station out of their home. In 1902, his great-great-grandson, Harry Bucky Lew, became the first African-American to ever play basketball professionally in the United States. And in 1943, the famed jazz musician Duke Ellington would write a piece in honor of Lew's life. Salem Poor was born into slavery in 1747 on the farm of John and Rebecca Poor near Andover, Massachusetts. Despite being enslaved, the Poors treated Salem more or less as a family member. Like James Lafayette, Salem was gifted to John's son, John Jr., from an early age. On July 10, 1769, Salem was able to buy his freedom for £27 from John Jr. Shortly after obtaining his freedom, Poor married Nancy Parker, a free mulatto woman with mixed Native American and African American ancestry who was a maidservant to Captain James Parker in August 1771. The couple would have one son, Jonas, who was baptized in September 1776. When the American Revolution began, Poor joined Colonel James Fry's regiment in the Massachusetts militia in May 1775. The regiment quickly marched from Cambridge to Charlestown when, on the night of June 16th, they began constructing fortifications on Breed's Hill alongside other colonial units. During Poor's baptism by fire at Bunker Hill, he became infamous for mortally wounding Grenadier Lieutenant Colonel James Abercrombie as he tried to climb the redoubt. While modern historians cast some doubt on whether or not Poor actually fired the shot that killed Abercrombie, many now believe he may have been the victim of friendly fire. Still, Poor's gallant conduct during this battle is beyond reproach. A petition sent to the General Court of Massachusetts from December 1775 and signed by 14 officers present at the battle, including Colonel William Prescott, testified to the exceptional service of Salem Poor. To the Honorable General Court of the Massachusetts Bay, the subscribers beg leave to report to your Honorable House, which we do in justice to the character of so brave a man that, under our own observation, we declare that a Negro man, called Salem Poor, of Colonel Fry's regiment, Captain Ames's company, in the late battle at Charlestown, behaved like an experienced officer, as well as an excellent soldier. To set forth particulars of his conduct would be tedious. We beg leave to say, in the person of this said Negro, centers a brave and gallant soldier. The reward due to so great and distinguished a character we submit to the Congress. Although there is no record that Poor ever received a reward for his service, the officers would never have written such a petition if Poor's conduct during the battle was not truly remarkable. Whether for killing Abercrombie, rallying his fellow soldiers, serving as a messenger, or fighting especially bravely, we'll never know these particulars of his conduct at Breed's Hill. Salem Poor's deeds that day will remain forever lost to history. Poor would continue to serve admirably for several years. While the particulars of his service have been lost, we know he fought in the Battle of White Plains and the battles of Saratoga in 1777 before suffering through the infamous winter at Valley Forge from 1777 to 1778 alongside his fellow soldiers. Come the new year, Poor would fight once more at the Battle of Monmouth. After several years of distinguished service, as the war in the North wound down, Salem Poor was discharged from service on March 20th, 1780. Poor would end up marrying a total of 4 times. He married Mary Twing, a free African-American woman, in 1780. The couple attempted to move to Providence, Rhode Island, but were ordered to leave the city. We don't know why. His marriage to Mary was unhappy. In 1785, he placed an ad in the Boston Gazette to forewarn all persons from trusting Mary, the wife of the subscriber. After leaving Mary, Salem Poor then married Sarah Stevens, a white woman, in 1787. He could never financially support himself or his family. He ended up being sent to the almshouse for several weeks in 1793. He was once again jailed in 1799 for breach of peace. A year before his death in 1802, Salem Poor would marry one last time to Hannah Aleph, an African-American woman of unknown status. After his death at the age of 55, the impoverished Salem was laid to rest in an anonymous grave at Copp's Hill Burying Ground in Boston. Salem Poor first received widespread recognition during the United States bicentennial celebrations, being awarded a stamp in the Contributors to the Cause series for his deeds at Bunker Hill. A street in his native Andover was later named after him. As fascinating and incredibly human as these two stories are, they are only a small part of the larger narrative of African Americans and their involvement in the Revolutionary War. Thousands of African Americans, both enslaved and free, fought on both sides throughout the war. And at least for those in the Continental Army, they fought in an army whose officers did not want them there. George Washington would purposefully exclude African Americans from serving in the Continental Army until January 1778, when manpower shortages finally forced him and Congress to accept African American soldiers. But acute manpower shortages are only half the reason for this shift in policy. The other half was cold heart logic. If the patriots wouldn't accept African Americans in their ranks, the British would gladly accept them in theirs. The overwhelming majority of African Americans who fought in the American Revolutionary War chose to serve with the British. Although around 5,000 African American men enlisted with the Continental Army, over 20,000 signed up with the British. This staggering difference was primarily due to the promise of freedom and equality offered by the British, a promise that the British, unlike the Americans, had yet to walk back on. The fact that over 4 times as many African Americans fought for the British in the American Revolution should illustrate that the righteousness of the patriot cause was not as self-evident as we often assume today. I hope you found this video both informative and exciting. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Join us next time as we look at our next forgotten figure, the commander of Kentucky's militia during the war, Brigadier George Rogers Clark.